Now, what happens under stress is that this hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH, is dumped into many parts of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex that sits behind our forehead, and the hippocampus, which is the primary memory and learning center in our brain. And what happens is when the CRH is dumped into the brain, it causes these dendritic spines to literally retract. So the space between our brain cells becomes so large, our brain cells can't effectively communicate with each other.
Wow,
This
that's
is the
interesting.
basis of like test anxiety or performance anxiety, where you know the material, you get into the high pressure situation, and you can't draw it because your
You're
dendritic
blank,
spine is
complete
retracted.
blank.
And
Yeah.
then you leave the situation, the information comes flooding back, and you think, oh my God, why didn't I remember it? Because of CRH. Now, in the short term, it's not a terrible thing, because the reason you remember things is once the CRH is metabolized out of the brain, the spines grow back. However, if stress is chronic, they actually decompose and they don't grow back.
Oh, so
And
they
so
atrophy
it
pretty much.
accelerates brain aging. You can't learn new things. You can't remember things like, what was that person's name? What was that restaurant? Did I take my pills today? All of those things happen with stress. Because the really good news that I'm most eager to share is that while deterioration of the brain is inevitable as we age, it is still possible, if we are proactive in preventing it, we can grow a bigger brain at every age. At 100, we can still be growing new brain cells by the pillars that I mentioned that help to not only slow aging of the brain, but actually to reverse it, like in the study I mentioned when I was at Harvard, that these people actually began to increase their cognitive abilities, their memory, their learning ability, their positive emotions. They actually ended up living on average 15 years longer than the control condition. You know, the statistics on Alzheimer's are so scary. And the statistics are that 60% of people over the age of 50 will develop Alzheimer's or dementia in their lifetime in the West. But we know from science that only 5% of Alzheimer's is genetic. Everything else is based on lifestyle.
Cures, Remedies, and Beyond podcast with Dr. Irina, a Stanford-trained medical doctor, inventor, and a published author with over 30 years of clinical experience, is bringing together the science of medicine and the art of healing for ultimate vitality and health. It engages in discussions with healthcare providers, wellness experts, innovators, philosophers, spiritual and industry leaders, as well as health and wisdom seekers, to provide you, the listeners, with practical tips and knowledge to help optimize your health and well-being. The Cures, Remedies, and Beyond podcast with Dr. Irina.
Today, we're going to discuss how to slow down or even to reverse brain aging. When it comes to our brain, science shows that our brains can essentially age at a different rate than our chronological age. Depending on your health, your lifestyle, and personality, you could be much younger or older in brain years than you realize. In addition, a study from a University of South Korea found that people who feel younger than their age show fewer signs of physical brain aging as the years go by. In other words, a youthful subjective age can actually have a positive effect on the mechanism of how the brain works and how fast it ages structurally.
Yes.
And the opposite is also true. I'm so privileged to introduce our amazing guest today, Professor Ronnie Newman, an award-winning Harvard-trained researcher, educator, and published author in mind, body, medicine, and anti-aging. Welcome to the show, Ronnie.
Oh, thank you. It's a delight to be here with you, as always.
You have had an interesting career that started over 44 years ago, I understand, with research, with research in mind, body, medicine at Harvard.
Yes.
You've published numerous research papers on the subject and have been one of the early pioneers in this field. How did it all begin for you, Ronnie? Your I understand that your doctoral application was focused on unlocking the full potential of the younger population. So how did you transition to studying the aging brain?
Well, it's just, I think, a case of the universe just put in front of me what I was supposed to be doing, because when I was in graduate school, as you know, I was interested in unlocking full potential, starting with younger. And I hadn't really given much thought to senior, more adult years, more mature years. And yet that was the research opportunity that was presented to me. And at the time, because this was in the 70s, so there was only beginning to be research on mind-body medicine, and um, this classic model that once we reach maturity, then we start declining. In fact, there was something that was at the time called the terminal plunge, which was, as you may be familiar with, that about 18 months before a person passed, all of a sudden everything began deteriorating really rapidly, including cognitive function. And the team of researchers, the team of scientists that I had the good fortune of being invited to join their team, were interested in challenging that assumption that we grow to a certain level, we level off, and then before we die, there's the terminal plunge. Because, it's part of human potential is how much can we grow and how long can we live vitally. And so I got to be part of that team, which is now not so much new news anymore. But at the time when our study was, we were doing this research actually on adults who were in their 80s already, who were already in nursing homes. And what our research showed shattered the existing paradigm of inevitable mental decline with aging, and showed that lifestyle choices, as you were speaking about, actually can reverse the trend of mental decline that was considered biologically inevitable. And it was one of the studies that created an understanding of the large difference cognitively between mental age, between biologic age, or how many years since your birthday, chronologic age, which is how many years since your birthday have passed, and your biologic age, which is how vital your brain is. So, and then your cognitive function, and then your quality of life. And then, of course, the head is, we used to think that this was no different than this. And as the body went, so the brain went. But we now know that as the brain goes, so the body goes. And so it was really exciting to be part of that team. And it really is the same issue of human potential.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you mentioned that there are, of course, several factors that can contribute to faster aging, premature aging, and decline. So what are the factors that adversely affect our brain that you guys found out?
This is a really great question. And according to the American Alzheimer's Association and neuroscientists pretty much globally, there are 6, and sometimes they say 7 main factors that influence how quickly the brain ages. And they are stress management, proper exercise, quality sleep, social connection, mental stimulation, and exercise. Did I say exercise twice?
No, I don't think so. So that's
okay,
that.
so
Yeah.
those are the 6. Those are the 6. And I would say a 7th one, which many people are also noticing, which is environmental toxins. And when I say the environment, it's not just outside, it's the things in our home. The bleach and the bounce and the Bounty and the Clorox that we use, that is known to adversely affect the brain and the whole body, because all of the factors that influence brain aging also influence body aging, because it's one unit.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, we do live in a pretty toxic world, as we all know. But I like that you mentioned stress, right? So, and I came across a research from Finland that found that highly cynical older people not only experiencing more cognitive decline, but also tend to die younger. So, and the researchers actually tied that cynical worldview, like, believing others are selfish or dishonest, to negative stress. And they blame that that's actually, related, of course, to cortisol levels, a stress hormone that has very harmful effect on the brain and hampers clear thinking as well. So, which is, of course, a sign of the aging brain that we cannot think clearly. So, tell us more. How does the stress actually and the cortisol affect our brain?
Oh, well, it does it in a number of ways. One of the things that happens is that under stress, the fight or flight response of the whole body kicks in. And while it's received a bad rep, I just want to mention that the stress response is an adaptive response that we need. It was created to protect us in life-threatening situations when we're about to fall off a cliff, or, a tiger or bear is going to jump out and eat us up. We need that to boost the adrenaline, to get all of our glucose going to our exercising muscles and to allow us to fight or flee. However, it's only meant for rare occasions and to be short.
And for a short period of time,
Exactly, a short period of time. There aren't going to be cobras jumping out of the weeds every day at you. If there are, you're stupid and you need to move to another place. So it's only meant for a short period of time. And what it does is a couple of things. As I said, the fight or flight response, one of the things it does is it takes the glucose, which is the energy that the brain needs to function, and it moves it from our brain to our exercising muscles to allow us to fight or flee. And what that does is it literally creates an energy shortage in the brain, because we don't need to be figuring out things. We don't need to be laying down new neural pathways when our life is in danger. We just need to get our muscles to get us out of there. And so it creates an energy shortage in the brain. The brain does not have enough energy to run properly, because the brain requires more glucose, more energy than any other organ in the body, and it gets starved of the energy that it needs. The other thing that happens under stress is that, there's so many things. We could spend hours just on this, but one of the other things is that stress causes inflammation in the brain and the body. And this is quite serious in the brain, because inflammation means that brain cells are being injured and that they're dying. They're being killed. And so it shrinks the brain and it causes it to age more rapidly. The other thing, there's so many things. The other thing that happens under stress is that calcium is dumped into the brain. Because, when people are stressed, calcium is very soothing. And to soothe the brain, it dumps calcium into the brain, which in the short term is okay, but chronically, long term, it kills brain cells. So you're killing brain cells when you're stressed. You're killing brain cells from the inflammation. And the other thing that happens under stress, as you're aware of, is that there is a hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, which is released into the brain under stress. And what it does, the way that our brain cells communicate is, let's say this is a brain cell. Okay, this is the center of the brain cell. And you remember these spiny-like protrusions are called dendritic spines. And the way our brain cells communicate is that an electrical impulse would come down from this neuron, the center of this brain, down the long spine, which is the axon, and dump a chemical into the space between brain cell number 1 and brain cell number 2. Then the dendritic spine has a synapse like my fingernail, which picks up that chemical that's been dumped in the space between the two brain cells. And it picks up that chemical. It travels down this dendritic spine through brain cell number 2. Then brain cell number 2 dumps a chemical. And that's how our brain cells communicate. Now, what happens under stress is that this hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH, is dumped into many parts of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex that sits behind our forehead, and the hippocampus, which is the primary memory and learning center in our brain. And what happens is when the CRH is dumped into the brain, it causes these dendritic spines to literally retract. So the space between our brain cells becomes so large, our brain cells can't effectively communicate with each other.
Wow,
This is
that's
the
interesting.
basis of like test anxiety or performance anxiety, where you know the material, you get into the high pressure situation, and you can't drop because your
You
dendritic
blank,
spines were
complete
trapped.
blank.
And then
Yeah.
you leave the situation, the information comes flooding back, and you think, oh my God, why didn't I remember it? Because of CRH. Now, in the short term, it's not a terrible thing, because the reason you remember things is once the CRH is metabolized out of the brain, the spines grow back. However, if stress is chronic, they actually decompose and they don't grow back.
Oh, so
And
they
so it
atrophy pretty much.
accelerates brain aging. You can't learn new things. You can't remember things like, what was that person's name? What was that restaurant? Did I take my pills today? All of those things happen with stress.
Wow, that is definitely an issue, because we are all living now in the chronic stress, obviously.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
which became, a serious factor in our lives that we need to combat. And that leads me to actually another question I wanted to ask you. So, as far as we know, there is at least one peptide, brain-derived neurotropic factor peptide, right? So
BDNF.
that actually acts in the opposite way, right? So
Yes.
it is called a fertilizer for our brains, keeping
Yes.
those
Yes.
neuronal
Miracle
connections
Grow for the
strong.
brain.
Right. And helps the connections flourishing. And it triggers a series of genes to grow even new brain cells and new
Yes.
neural pathways, which have been linked to improving memory and mental alertness. Yeah. So tell us more about the BDNF, which is, of course, the
Sure.
abbreviation of this.
Sure.
And how does it work, and how can we increase the levels?
Wonderful. So BDNF is one of the ways, because the really good news that I'm most eager to share is that while deterioration of the brain is inevitable as we age, it is still possible, if we are proactive in preventing it, we can grow a bigger brain at every age. At 100, we can still be growing new brain cells by the pillars that I mentioned that help to not only slow aging of the brain, but actually to reverse it, like in the study I mentioned when I was at Harvard, that these people actually began to increase their cognitive abilities, their memory, their learning ability, their positive emotions. They actually ended up living on average 15 years longer than the control condition. So with a
15
better
years,
quality of
that's a
life
lot.
and less cancer and cardiovascular disease and all of that. So BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, as you know, is my favorite protein, is a protein in the brain that protects existing neurons, existing brain cells from dying. And it also helps to grow new brain cells. And so there are a number of things that increase BDNF production. One of them is meditation, increases BDNF, and breath work. Certain breath practices increase BDNF production. The other thing that increases BDNF production is exercise, which is one of the other anti-aging pillars. And after exercise, BDNF levels are found to be sky high. And why this is important is that the body has the capacity to produce BDNF throughout the lifespan. But unless we do certain things, our BDNF levels become less and less. So our ability to create new brain cells becomes less and less and less. But again, the good news is that there are things we can do starting today, like getting stress levels in check, which we can, and I can actually, if you'd like, I can teach people a little biohack for getting stress levels in check really quickly.
Yes,
So
would love that.
We can do all of that. And so, yes, so BDNF is critical. And the reason it's called Miracle Grow for the Brain is that one of my colleagues at Harvard actually sprinkled BDNF on the dendritic spines, remember these things, in a petri dish on neurons, and they found that the neurons began to grow new dendritic spines.
Amazing.
Just in the petri dish from sprinkling BDNF on them. It is literally miracle growth for the brain, because the brain has the capacity, as I said, to lay down new brain cells till the day we die, which is an exciting discovery, because it used to be thought that just like the the device that you're watching this podcast on, that once we reached adulthood, the brain was pretty much set, like our height, and there was nothing else we could do about it. But we now know that's not true. And so harnessing the power of the breath, harnessing the power of BDNF, getting proper exercise is really important. And one other thing about exercise I want to mention is that why exercise is important is that the blood flow to the brain also tends to decline with age, as does oxygen consumption. But what happens is that when you pump more blood through the system and also into the brain, it brings more blood, it brings more oxygen to the brain. And our largest pump is not our heart. Most people think it's the heart. It's not the heart, it's our legs. It's not our heart. Our legs are the biggest pump. And so when we exercise, we're pumping the brain with oxygen, with blood flow, and we're also laying down new blood vessels in the brain, which helps to grow a bigger brain because it supplies more nutrition to the brain.
That is really interesting. Yeah. So, of course, the muscle mass in our lower body is definitely much bigger than our heart muscle. So, any particular type of exercise that really helps to improve BDNF, Ronnie?
Well, the definitive exercise is really just getting your heart pumping. So even, I got new tile laid in my condo about 2 years ago, and somebody spilled something and all the grout got like brown in my brand new white tile. I got down on my hands and knees with a toothbrush and was scrubbing that grout. And my heart was really, I could feel my heart pumping. That's exercise. You just need to get your heart pumping. And of course, you need to go, if you've been sedentary, doing crossword puzzles, you're not going to go out and run the Boston Marathon. You need to, be a little smart about it and, talk to your doctor about what's healthy, but you got to get your heart pumping, and you want to aim for at least 150 minutes of heart pumping exercise a day.
To improve that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, since you mentioned the crossword puzzles, and the increase in the blood supply to the brain, especially as we age, so I remember I was really impressed reading about of course, we need to exercise our brain, right? So with the novel activities, languages, crossword puzzles that, tend to, of course, help us to stay in a more youthful brain functioning. So, but then they compare that to, as you mentioned, exercise, right? So, and the effect of those novel activities and the puzzles, so compared to the exercise was like 4 times more effective in actually preventing the mental decline. So I was so surprised. So that to that level. So so thank you so much for mentioning that. Yeah.
Now the other thing I will mention is don't stop doing Sudoku and other things like that, because it's like saying, well, I need vitamins, but you also need minerals and you need water, so we need fiber, we need everything. And the greatest results come from using all 6 pillars. And so there are interesting things you can do. Basically, you want to just travel the road less traveled, I think is the expression. So even things like you can brush your teeth. Hopefully you have more than one tooth. You can brush your teeth with the opposite hand. Pay attention to which hand you reach into the cabinet to pull out a bottle, and start doing it with the opposite hand. Absolutely. In fact, I'll show you a little thing because all of this lays down new neurons. So, if you like knitting, well, that's great, but you can't just keep knitting more complex patterns. Take up car mechanics, take up gardening. You have to do something different to lay down those new pathways and to get the different parts of the brain speaking to each other, because you want what's called whole brain thinking. And so you need to involve movement in some things and voice in some things. So really, actually, brain exercises are important as well.
Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, I know you've spoken at the United Nations and World Bank's National Institutes of Mental Health. You've been to PBS, NBC, CNN, international shows, and you were even in the documentaries, The Truth About Alzheimer's and Memory Loss. So Could you also enlighten us on how can we, again, prevent memory loss? How can we combat that in the lifestyle or whatever we should take?
Right. Well, a big part of that are all of the things we've talked about. We need to nourish the brain. And one of the things that nourishes the brain, obviously, is our food. Because even though the brain only weighs 3 to 4% of our total body weight, the brain requires 20% of all of the food we eat goes directly to nourish the brain. So that means, if you think about it, 1 out of every 5 bites you take feeds your brain.
Wow.
1 out of every 5 bites. So if you're eating a donut instead of an apple, you're, giving donuts to your brain, because the brain is an incredibly vascular organ. In fact, there's hundreds and hundreds of miles. If you laid out the structure of the brain, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles long, and it requires good nutrition. So one of the things that's really important for nutrition, one thing I can mention to the audience here, one of the best things that you can do is to avoid the foods that damage the brain and the body, and because wrong foods also cause inflammation. And one of the biggest enemies, especially in the West, is refined carbohydrates, refined white sugar, because it causes inflammation in the brain and the body. And as we are all now aware, inflammation kills brain cells and causes the body to age more rapidly, much more rapidly. And so, but I also want to mention that there are delicious alternatives to sugar, things like stevia and monk fruit and coconut palm sugar and amounts of date sugar. But you want to avoid those artificial sweeteners, because things like Splenda and Sweet and Low, because, for example, Splenda, which is the common name for something called sucralose, what it is it's a sugar molecule from which 3 atoms have been taken out and replaced by chlorine, like you sterilize your pool with.
Oh my God, that's a major toxic substance.
So the upside of that is that while it still tastes sweet because it's a sugar molecule, the body doesn't recognize it. So it doesn't attempt to break it down. And so it doesn't have any calories. So that's the upside of sucralose. But there is a very dark side to it as well, because exactly for the same reason, because the body doesn't recognize it, it sees it as a foreign invader. And that triggers the immune system and causes inflammation. Inflammation, which we now know kills brain cells. So when you take that packet, the pink packets and the blue packets and the yellow packets, know that it's killing brain cells. And instead you can opt for things like stevia or monk fruit. And the one thing I want to add on that is, just like when you buy a used car, our food supply is now a situation where it's buyer beware. And what that means is that you need to read the label, because there are things like erythritol and maltitol and sorbitol, all of these tols and dextrose, which is just another name for sugar. All of these things are in packets that say like there's something called stevia in the raw, and it sounds like a very healthy company. But when you read it, the first ingredient is dextrose, second ingredient is erythritol, and only the third ingredient is the stevia. So you want to make sure that it's 100% pure. You can easily get it at like Whole Foods or online. And I've done a lot of research, so I can shorten the search. There is a company called Tiki Hut that has 100% pure monk fruit. There's also a company called 38, which has liquid monk fruit that's pure. And stevia, there's sweet leaf.
That's good to know, because I was trying to find the monk fruit, but it's all with erythritol. It's unbelievable.
Right. So if you Google 100% monk fruit, and so there's Tiki Hut and the 38.
Yeah, that's a good.
And the other thing about it is that it affects, these artificial sweeteners are found to affect the microbiome, the gut, because there's a connection between our gut and our brain. It's the gut-brain link. You know, that people talk about the gut now as the second brain. And our gut actually contains a microbiome, a field of microbes. Some are beneficial, some are neutral, and some are harmful. And it plays a central role in our health. In fact, half of all of the immune cells in our body are produced in our gut. And 90% of the feel-good hormones like dopamine are produced not in the brain, but in the gut. And so that we need to make sure that our gut, the healthy bacteria in the gut, can do their job and produce the chemicals that we need. And what's been found is that one packet of sucralose can destroy half of the beneficial flora in the gut, which leads to an overgrowth of the bad bacteria in the gut, which can actually pierce the lining of the colon and allow feces to dump into the bloodstream, and some of it ends up in the brain. So it's called leaky gut, but it's also now called leaky brain.
Wow, that's incredible. I didn't even realize that only one packet can cause so much damage. So no wonder we're all dealing with a lot of GI issues, you know, so detected, not detected. And one other topic I wanted you to discuss that I know you're really adamant about is the good sleep.
Oh, yes. Because what sleep does, sleep allows for restoration of the brain and the body. In sleep, the brain does what's called flushing. Think about it really like flushing a toilet. The garbage collectors in the brain clear out all of the byproducts of natural metabolism, and it allows the brain to restore itself. It also allows the immune system to get rest, because if you don't get our sleep, as you probably know, has 4 stages. There's stage 1 and 2, which are lighter, and the deeper stages of sleep are stage 3 and stage 4. Now, what happens when we feel stress is that we don't get to the deeper stages because cortisol suppresses the production of melatonin. So we don't get, the body doesn't get to that really deep rest. But the other thing that impacts how much time we spend in the deeper levels of sleep, number 1 is stress. Number 2 is age, because what's been found is that once we reach about 31, that we spend significantly less time in the deeper stages of sleep unless we do something to reverse that. And what's been found is certain stress management techniques, certain breathing techniques actually can reverse that. So we spend more time in sleep because, you know, the statistics on Alzheimer's are so scary. You know, and the statistics are that 60% of people over the age of 50 will develop Alzheimer's or dementia in their lifetime in the West. But we know from science that only 5% of Alzheimer's is genetic. Everything else is based on lifestyle. And you may know that what happens in Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia is that there's something called tau proteins that are produced as a byproduct in the brain. And if they're not flushed out, what it does is it continues to build up like plaque in the body, and it makes it impossible for the brain cells to communicate with each other, and it starts to engulf them and destroy them. So unless you can flush out those natural
products of degradation,
then you're putting yourself at high risk for dementia. So you need to get deep sleep, because also if you don't, it's like if you drive your car into the garage and you leave it in neutral but you don't turn it off and it just runs in neutral all night long. That's what happens to our immune system if we don't get to stage 3 and stage 4. So it's really, really, really important to make sleep a priority.
And not to mention that I remember you spoke about specific hours of sleep, so that there is a specific pattern of even BDNF release or growth hormone release, right?
Yes. So what happens is that we're part of nature. And so our biologic clock, our circadian rhythms are tied to the rhythms of nature. And there is another hormone called human growth hormone, which, just like it sounds, is responsible for our growth. And it's also for rejuvenating the system. And it's really high in young people. And it drops dramatically, like by 70% by the time you reach like 60. But we also know that the body produces human growth hormone when we sleep. And it's tied to the circadian rhythms of nature, the natural cycles of night and day. And the body produces 5 times as much HGH between 10 p.m. and midnight than any other time of night. So you can increase your body's production of HGH by 500% by just getting into bed in time. And if you're like me, I used to be really one to I want to cross just one more thing off my to-do list before I go to sleep. And if you switch those late night tasks to early morning tasks, you will be amazed at your energy levels through the day. So it's really worth putting in the effort to do that.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable. For some people, it's probably harder to reverse that, but we do have very unique brain plasticity, and we can retrain ourselves, right? So as you were saying, absolutely. and you did mention that you might teach our listeners a very quick tool how all of us can basically combat stress.
Oh, absolutely. And you can also do it at night, like right before you go to sleep. It helps go into sleep. And if you wake up at night and you have trouble falling back asleep, you can use it again. You can actually do it anywhere. And it's called straw breath. And I'd like to tell you just a little story about it to show you the power. When my mom was 93 and living on her own, she went running to get the phone and fell flat back on the tile, had a huge hematoma, a huge bump on the back of her head. Fortunately, she didn't lose consciousness. She called me. I went over. I raced her to the hospital. They did all of the tests. And then, she's in her cubicle in the emergency room. And the doctor comes in and he says, I have really good news for you. There's no brain bleed. There's no bone fractures. There's no permanent damage. So other than being black and blue for a while, you will be fine. So now it's important that you relax. And the reason he said that is that her blood pressure at that point was 199 over 100.
Oh, wow.
And what that means is that even though the fall didn't do her in, she was literally in mortal danger of having a stroke and dying from the stroke. And because of other medications she was on and what they'd already given her at the hospital, they couldn't give her anything more to bring down her blood pressure. And the doctor leaves and I'm sitting there 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and nothing is happening. The monitors are still around 200. And so I said, Ma, I'm going to teach you a breathing technique that we teach to the gangs in the inner city when we bring them together for conflict resolution. And we're going to do it together. And I taught her the straw breath. And in 3 minutes, her blood pressure came down 20 points.
Wow. That is impressive. I mean, no wonder, in the ancient world, so in the ancient techniques, they used breath for so many important functions, right? So not to mention, of course, just a healthy body. So in addition to healthy mind and spirit. So, that's interesting. Yeah. And I know that you have a unique program also, and you're involved in the Nova Universities and multiple other Art of Living foundations. So, how our listeners can get connected to what you do?
Very good. There's a couple of ways. One of which is, and the viewers will all have the link. My colleague Deborah Poneman, who's a world-renowned expert in peak performance, and she and I co-teach a program, an anti-aging program online, where we go into great depth into all of the 6 pillars, and it's taught online twice a year. And we will provide you the link where we have put a book that we created, an ebook on anti-aging, which includes all kinds of tips for stress management and lifelong brain health and lifelong body health, and even peak sexual performance at every age, everything. And it's in this ebook that is our gift to you, just to help get you on the path of seeing what it is that that we can do, and they're really only tweaks in our lifestyle patterns that make a huge difference. Because we know there's two aspects that we've touched on. There's our chronologic age, or how many years since we're born, and then there's our biologic age, which is how healthy and youthful our body is or is not. And what's been found is that when people use the lifestyle tips that we have in our program and that we've discussed today, that the difference between our chronologic age and our biologic age gets bigger and bigger. And you've seen this, there are some people who are 70, like me, in our 70s, and we don't look like we're in our 70s.
No,
and then
you
there's
look
people
amazing.
in their 70s who look like they're 170.
Yeah.
Or people who are 40 who look 60, or 40
Right.
who look 20, like that. So all of this, and by the way, disclosure, no cosmetic surgery. This is really me. So
I love
anyway, we have this free book for you that it would be our pleasure to offer to you. And then there's another,
Thank you.
There's a foundation which I work with called the Art of Living Foundation. And we teach a particular evidence-based breath program called Sky Breath Meditation, which is phenomenal at supporting brain health and heart health and immune system function and cardiovascular function, and helps with social connection and all of the things that keep us vital and that increase our health span. Because the World Health Organization has actually recently put forth the term health span, which is different than lifespan. Because lifespan is obviously the number of years you live, but your health span is how many of those years you live on top of your game, being vital and clear-minded and energetic and independent and enjoying life. And all of these things increase health span. So I'd like to teach you one now before we sign off, the straw breath that we started talking about. So
Yes,
what
please.
you do is you simply take a normal breath in through the nose, and then you purse your lips like you're holding a straw, like those skinny straws from coffee shops, and you allow the breath to go out through the straw. Now, it's not like blowing out a birthday candle, but you just allow it to go out at its own rate through the straw. So again, it's in through the nose and out through the straw. And once that exhale is normally complete, you take another breath through the nose and out again through the straw. And if you're in a place where you can close your eyes, it's even more relaxing if you close your eyes. So let's continue doing that together. In through the nose and out through the straw.
Is there any particular ratio of breathing in versus breathing out? Doesn't have to be.
It's just however long it takes for the breath to naturally go out through the straw. It's a real relaxed thing. So it's in through the nose and out through the straw.
Isn't it the same that activates your parasympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, I'll explain all that later too. Let's just do it first. Is that okay?
Yes.
Thanks, Doc. In through the nose and out through the straw. When that breath is complete, another one in through the nose and out through the straw. And let's continue breathing in through the nose and out through the straw.
Wow, it works. And I love how simple this is.
And when you finish the next out breath, you can relax the lips, allow the breath to return to normal. And when you feel ready, you can open the eyes. How was that?
It works.
Yeah.
It definitely works. I feel like almost my heartbeat rate decreased. So
Yes. And you asked a really brilliant question that, yes, The breath is tied to both the fight and flight response, which is the stress response of the body, which is called the sympathetic nervous system. You can remember S for stress, S for sympathetic. So there's two main branches. There's the stressful sympathetic, and then there's the peaceful parasympathetic, the rest and digest and rejuvenate and vital aspect of the nervous system. And what happens is that when you, the inhale activates the sympathetic nervous system, it energizes the system. And the out breath, the exhale, is found to activate the peaceful parasympathetic nervous system. And so by breathing out through the straw and elongating, the exhale becomes, as you noticed, a lot longer than the inhale. It activates the parasympathetic, the peaceful parasympathetic nervous system. So the balance, you can think of the two like a seesaw. Either stress or peace is dominating. And by having the peaceful parasympathetic, we're spending more time breathing that way comfortably. It creates ideal balance in the nervous system again.
Oh, wow. I love that. Yeah, we definitely need that, even sitting in the traffic, right? So, or somebody cuts you off. So
Right.
it's
But
so
even
simple.
in restaurants, doctor, because we know that there's something called ambient racket, which is, restaurants have music and got televisions now, and elevators have music, and there's traffic going by. And what happens with the nervous system doesn't know the difference between a cobra rattling in the bushes that could be dangerous and the noise of cars rushing by. There's some general background noise, and so it puts the system, the fight or flight system, the sympathetic nervous system, on alert. And so always, even if you don't have a particularly stressful life, unless you're living in the cornfield somewhere, if you're living in a big city and there's a lot of activity, or you're in an office and they're playing background music and people are coming in all the time, there is some level of stress that may not be uncomfortable, but it's not ideal for the system. And so doing something like this, like if you're in traffic, it's a perfect example. You can do the straw breath to chillax a little bit. Or if you're in a bank and you're in a rush and the people, the person in front of you is chit-chatting with the teller about Jell-O recipes, and you sort of feel like strangling them, and it's like, okay, chillax, and you do the straw breath, and it helps bring you back to center.
Thank you for teaching us that, Ronnie. Yeah, it's so helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and immediate. So as you said, even the blood pressure can go down.
Yeah.
In a moment. Yeah.
In a moment.
Yeah. It was very helpful to really understand how we can address our brain health and how to slow down or even reverse aging. So really appreciate your insights, and you have such an important message for people, and you've been teaching, of course, people to take care of themselves and get more youthful. And you're a really good example. So you definitely walk your talk. So thank you again for this delightful conversation and for coming and talking to us today.
Thank you for having me, for giving this platform, and for the important work you do, because it's so important for people to realize that their destiny is not in their genes, but it's really in their hands. And the last thing I'll mention is that we now know that in many, many cases, our genetic makeup is a risk factor, but it's not a determining factor. And
Not
as
a
I mentioned
predicament.
before, like Alzheimer's, only 5% of it is genetic. All the rest of it is within our control. Cancer, heart disease, all of these things, we have a powerful hack into our system to take the destiny of our brains and our bodies in our own hands, so we continue to do good in the world.
Oh, what a great message. Yeah, as simple as stress control, as you said, so which is in our hands. And it's very empowering to know that. So yeah, what a pleasure talking to you. Yeah. Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you so much. Bye for
And
now.
bye for now. And thank you for joining us at Cures, Remedies, and Beyond, exploring science and the wisdom of health and healing. We hope to see you next time.
This podcast represents the personal views and opinions of the host and the guests and does not constitute medical advice. The statements contained in this podcast have not been evaluated by the FDA. Any products or treatments mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease.